in your practice, you've seen survivors of childhood sexual abuse, specifically male survivors, which is the focus for this recording or interview. What have you seen are the short, medium, and long-term consequences or impact, on these human beings because they were sexually abused as a child?
Well, I mean, it's vast and it varies. I think, to be honest, I see some boys and men that where they're actually dealing with it themselves in quite a healthy way, and sometimes they come to therapy, and I go, "Doesn't sound like you need therapy. It sounds like you've got a hold on it. You do it, dealing with it, and that's great." And that's fantastic. Others, for some boys, and I emphasise for some boys and men, not all. I find that issues around masculinity play a part, and it's about what it means to be a boy. And there is some great research and books out there. There's a fantastic book called The Palgrave Handbook of Male Psychology. It's very bulky, as you can see at the side, but it's a fantastic book, and I would say it's essential reading for anyone working with boys and men in any field. But what I often see in terms of the immediate impact is, in general, I'm generalising here.
Yes,
but,
there are many consequences, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think what would be great is if you could highlight maybe some of the most prominent consequences.
Okay. So what I often find is that a number of boys and men, they have two, in my experience, have two responses. First of all, they need to recognise and acknowledge that they have been abused. Some don't. So that's the first barrier that you have. Because if you think, well, I'm a boy and actually I'm being sexually abused by my sister, my mum, another woman, it might be, well, women don't abuse boys, so I can't be being abused. So actually, first of all, you've got to get them to recognise they've been abused. Even if they recognise they've been abused, they might play it down because they're boys. So I've certainly worked with a lot more girls who have said to me, my boyfriend is abusing me and it's horrible. But actually, when I've worked with boys who have said their girlfriend is abusing them, they play it down.
Sure.
And that's an interesting sort of dynamic. So they've got to recognise it and they've got to acknowledge it. If you are lucky enough to get them to the point where they recognise it and acknowledge it, it's about, okay, how did it affect you then and how is it affecting you now? And I often hear two examples, and they sometimes relate to ideas around masculinity. So the first basic one is, do you know what? I was abused, I was raped, I experienced some sort of sexual abuse. My idea of being male has been attacked. It's been threatened. So hang on a minute. My idea of being a man or being a boy or being a male has been damaged, or I believe it's been damaged. So I need to fix it. So how do I fix it? Well, I will go out and display all of this stereotypical male behaviour to show everyone that I am still a big, strong man. And to some degree, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. It depends on what the behaviour is.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you decide to go out and use positive aspects of masculinity, and such as you provide for your family, you contribute to society, or all of that sort of stuff, there's that. But if you think, well, no, I've actually been abused, and that's damaged my idea about what it means to be a man, so I'm going to go out now and be a man. So, for example, when I experienced my abuse, I went out and I went looking for fights with people. I went looking for fights with other men after I'd had a drink.
Would you say that was to prove to yourself and others that you are a man?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What happened to me, I just did not feel like I was a real man. The problem is that I had a very unhealthy and unrealistic concept about what a real man is. You could actually argue that the idea of a real man doesn't exist. You could have someone who is who provides and displays traditional masculine qualities, and there is a lot of discussion around masculinity being bad and masculinity being toxic, but actually that's a little bit black and white, and it's not helpful. Elements of masculinity can be great. So one of the things that I found is, rather than saying to boys and men in therapy, look, you were abused and it was horrible, come and talk about your feelings and open up, what I found is changing the language to have more male friendly language. So instead of saying come to therapy and open up and talk about your feelings, it's about saying come to therapy, take control of your life and take action. And it's about saying, what happened to you? Of course, it was horrible, it was abusive, it was traumatic. So let's come to therapy, take charge, take control, and take action to do something about that. And it, again, also,
just the reframing. And does that have a positive impact?
Oh,
like they're willing to come to therapy then?
Absolutely. Again, to put the caveat in there are boys and men that will say, yeah, I want to come, I want to talk about my feelings, I want to open up.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, in general, I certainly find that I get a lot more boys and men referred to me because of my direct approach, because of using very male-friendly language, you know, and actually a lot of men have said to me, boys and men have said, well, Phil, I saw this therapist and she was really nice, but we just sat there for an hour and he or she was talking to me and listening to me and empathizing with me and said, sounds like you've had a really hard time. And I used to sit thinking, are we going to do something? What are we going to do? And a lot of therapy,
practical,
exactly.
The problem.
And this is what a lot of boys and men want. But I think what we often do is we try and fit them in a traditional therapy box where, yeah, but talk about how you feel. But actually, if you give them what they want, like practical solutions, action-orientated stuff, they end up doing that anyway. I remember once there was a boy I worked with, and he just never spoke. I did all the speaking. But then I gave him, it was like we call it Wacky Wiggler, which is basically a movable thing. And when you squeeze it, it jumps up and down. I went, here you go, do something with that. He would not stop talking. And I think the reason he was talking is because his hands were doing something and he felt like he was taking action and doing. I've worked with guys where they've actually suffered historic child sex abuse. And what they've done is they've come back to therapy and said, Phil, I've been all over social media trying to find the man who abused me as a child. And he goes, I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to feel if I find him. But it's just good to feel like I'm doing something. And it's a very, you know, so what we have to do is sometimes with boys and men that we're working with, adapt our language to make it action focused, action oriented, doing movements, you know, solutions, all of that more practical stuff, you know, get them moving, getting them doing, it can often be a good thing. But yeah, so as I digress from your question, sorry. So the first thing is
fine.
You've got these guys that boys and men that act out. It's like, well, I don't feel like I'm a real man, so I'll show the world I'm a real man. But it's like, how are you going to do that? And are you actually going to do that in a way that is useful and healthy, that doesn't cause problems? Because there's nothing wrong with wanting to show the world that you are a man, as long as it's done in a realistic, healthy way. So what I was doing, I was going out looking for fights, not great. I was having lots of promiscuous sex with people, not great. I was doing all of that stuff. So actually, to prove to me, myself and the world that I was a real man, I was actually then bringing in another problem. Yes. So now I've got to deal with being bruises and fighting with people, all of that. I was drinking on all of that. So sometimes it can be useful to explore with boys. What's your idea of being male? What does it mean to you to be a male? And if you notice things about rigidity, that's the problem. So if it means never cry, never ever in your life, okay? If it's like always be tough, always always suppress your emotions, okay? Suppress your emotions. What, always suppress your emotions? Could there be times where actually it's a good thing to suppress your emotions on a temporary basis for certain reasons, but actually if you do it long term, it becomes repression? So again, it's about the rigidity. The second thing that I often see with boys and men is they say, well, my idea of being a male has been damaged, or I believe it's been damaged. So what do? I need to fix it. I'm not going to fix it going out being violent and doing that, because that's just not in me. But do you know what? I don't think I'm going to do anything, because I feel weak that I was abused. If I ask for help, well, men should never ask for help. Boys and men should never ask for help. They should deal with it on their own. That's what being a strong, big, tough guy is. So actually, I already feel weak because I was abused. If I ask for help and say I'm struggling, I'm going to feel even more weak. So I'm not going to ask for any help. I'm going to deal with it on my own. Now, again, if you deal with it on your own in a healthy, good way, great. But a lot of people don't. The biggest killer of males under a certain age is suicide. So it links to suicide, self-harm, depression, withdrawing, and that sort of thing. So it's sort of acting out very actively or withdrawing. They're the two things that I often see from boys and men. The other interesting dynamic is that actually some boys and men are scared that they will be labelled the perpetrator.
Really?
So if you're a young lad and you are known to the police for crime and drugs and youth offending, you're already known to the police for trouble, breaking the law.
Yes.
If some boys worry that actually if I tell the police that this has happened to me, they won't believe me. They see me as trouble anyway. They'll think I've lied about it. Sometimes if there's an older woman involved, what you sadly sometimes get is the dynamic of gender where the older woman can say, well, no, I'll just tell people that you raped me. And the boys are terrified. The boys are absolutely terrified because actually, who are the police going to believe?
And because of the gender stereotypes, there's a high likelihood that
absolutely. And there's been quite a lot of cases over here where judges have made very inappropriate comments about female perpetrators. You know, there was one judge a few years ago that it was a woman in her 20s where the judge had said, I can understand why this boy had sex with you. What 15-year-old boy would turn down such an attractive offer? There was a case a few months ago, a woman called Leah Cordice. She's now in prison. She groomed and abused a young teenage boy, and she said, well, he raped me. And thankfully, the court saw through it and proved that she was lying. But again, often what you get, the dynamic, you don't rarely hear of boys or men who are perpetrators of abuse. You don't really hear them saying to girls and women, I'll tell people you forced me. But you often hear a lot of female perpetrators that can do it to boys, and it's the dynamic. And this is why some boys are scared that they might be labelled the perpetrator when they are in fact the victim, which is another reason they don't disclose.
I was just going to say the low report rate.